The Republican Party has become hostile to democracy and compromise, as evidenced by the January 6 attack on the Capitol, the widespread belief in the 2020 election fraud, and the obstructionist tactics in Congress. The January 6 attack on the Capitol was a violent attempt to overturn the results of a free and fair election, incited by President Trump and supported by many Republican lawmakers. It was the culmination of a long campaign of lies and misinformation that aimed to undermine public confidence in American democracy. The attack showed that many Republicans are willing to resort to force to keep power, even if it means endangering the lives of their fellow citizens and violating the Constitution. The widespread belief in the 2020 election fraud is another sign of the Republican Party's radicalization against democracy. Despite the lack of any credible evidence, a majority of Republicans still believe that the election was stolen from Trump, and that Biden is an illegitimate president. This belief is fueled by Trump's relentless claims of fraud, echoed by right-wing media outlets and Republican officials. By refusing to accept the reality of Biden's victory, Republicans are rejecting the will of the majority of Americans and undermining the legitimacy of democratic institutions. The obstructionist tactics in Congress are yet another manifestation of the Republican Party's hostility to democracy and compromise. For years, Republicans have used their power in the Senate to block or delay legislation, nominations, and confirmations that they oppose, regardless of the merits or popularity of those proposals. They have also exploited procedural rules to prevent debate and amendments, and to impose their minority views on the majority. By doing so, Republicans have thwarted the democratic process and prevented the government from addressing the urgent needs of the country. One of the key demographic groups that the Republican Party has lost ground among is Asian Americans, who have shifted away from the GOP due to its anti-immigrant rhetoric and policies. Asian Americans are the fastest-growing racial group in the country, but they are also the least likely to vote. However, in the past two elections, they have shown a clear preference for the Democratic Party over the Republican Party. According to election returns and exit polls, Asian Americans voted for President Obama by a wide margin in 2012 and 2016, and for Democratic candidates in the 2020 and 2022 midterms. In contrast, in the span of 2 decades, from 1984 to 2004, Asian Americans voted for Republican presidential candidates by a majority or a plurality. Analysts have described this political shift as one of the most dramatic swings in recent presidential voting behavior across any demographic. What explains this change? There are several factors that have contributed to the alienation of Asian Americans from the GOP. One is the increasing diversity of the Asian American population, which includes immigrants and refugees from different countries and cultures, such as China, India, Vietnam, Korea, Philippines, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. These groups have different histories, languages, religions, and political views, but they share some common experiences and challenges in the U.S., such as discrimination, racism, economic inequality, and cultural assimilation. Another factor is the Republican Party's stance on immigration, which has become more restrictive and hostile over time. Many Asian Americans are either immigrants themselves or have family members who are immigrants. They are concerned about the GOP's policies that seek to limit legal immigration, deport undocumented immigrants, ban refugees and asylum seekers from certain countries, and end birthright citizenship. They are also offended by the GOP's rhetoric that portrays immigrants as criminals, terrorists, invaders, or burdens on society. A third factor is the Republican Party's position on education, which has been unpopular among many Asian Americans who value academic achievement and opportunity. Asian Americans have been unhappy with proposals to change the rules for magnet high schools that admit students based on test scores, such as Stuyvesant in New York City. These proposals aim to increase diversity and reduce racial disparities in these schools, but they also threaten to reduce the number of seats for Asian American students who perform well on standardized tests. Asian Americans have also been opposed to affirmative action policies that consider race as a factor in college admissions, arguing that they are unfair and discriminatory. A fourth factor is the Republican Party's lack of outreach and representation of Asian Americans. While some GOP candidates have made efforts to appeal to Asian American voters, such as Lee Zeldin in New York and Greg Abbott in Texas, many others have ignored or neglected this demographic. The GOP has also failed to recruit and support more Asian American candidates for office, resulting in a low number of elected officials from this group within the party. The Democratic Party, on the other hand, has been more successful in engaging and empowering Asian American voters and leaders. These factors have combined to create a gap between the Republican Party and Asian American voters that may be hard to bridge in the near future. Unless the GOP changes its policies and rhetoric on immigration and education, and increases its outreach and representation of Asian Americans, it may continue to lose ground among this key demographic group that could make a difference in close elections. The Republican Party faces a challenge of reconciling its base of hardcore Trump supporters, who embrace anti-democratic and violent ideas, with its more moderate and traditional wing, who seek to restore the party's reputation and appeal. This challenge has become more evident after the party's disappointing performance in the 2022 midterm elections, when it failed to capitalize on the Biden administration's weaknesses and lost several key races to the Democrats. One of the reasons for this failure was the party's inability to attract moderate and independent voters, who were turned off by Trump's influence and his false claims of election fraud. According to CNN, some moderate Republicans have admitted that the party has an extremism problem and needs to move beyond Trump if it wants to win future elections. They argue that voters are not interested in extremism and want pragmatic solutions to the country's problems. However, Trump still commands a loyal following among a large segment of the Republican base, who see him as their champion and leader. He has been quietly working to shore up support for his allies in Congress and has hinted at running for president again in 2024. He has also attacked some of his potential rivals, such as Florida Gov. Ron DeSantis, for their past positions on entitlements and culture wars. Trump has portrayed himself as a moderate who won't cut spending or start foreign wars. This creates a dilemma for the Republican Party: how to balance the demands of the Trump loyalists with the need to broaden its appeal to other voters. Some analysts have suggested that the party is divided into four factions: the Trumpists, who are loyal to Trump and his agenda; the populists, who share some of Trump's views but are more open to compromise; the conservatives, who adhere to traditional Republican principles such as limited government and free markets; and the moderates, who are more centrist and pragmatic. The question is whether these factions can coexist and cooperate within the same party, or whether they will clash and split. The answer may depend on how Trump himself behaves in the next few years, whether he will continue to dominate and polarize the party, or whether he will fade away and allow other voices to emerge. The future of the Republican Party may hinge on this uncertainty.